When people talk about family, they often picture warmth, safety, and unconditional love. But for me, family always meant something different, something colder. My name is Isabella, and for as long as I can remember, my parents made it painfully clear who their favorite was. My brother, Ethan, was their pride, their golden child, the son who could do no wrong. And me? I was the shadow that existed behind his light. Even as a little girl, I noticed the difference. When Ethan got a B on his test, it was, "That's okay, sweetheart, you tried your best." But when I got an A, it was, "Good, now aim higher next time." It wasn't encouragement, it was expectation, one that never came with affection. I remember one birthday, mine actually. I was turning 8 and I had been counting down the days. I imagined a cake, maybe balloons, and my parents smiling for once, just for me. But when the day came, Ethan threw a tantrum because he didn't get the toy he wanted. Guess whose birthday party got canceled? Mine. That night, I sat in my room listening to my parents comforting him, and that's when it clicked. His sadness mattered more than my happiness ever would. As we grew older, that imbalance became part of everyday life. Ethan would crash my bike, and somehow I'd get grounded. He'd skip class, and my mom would say, "He's just under pressure." But if I came home 5 minutes late, she'd be waiting at the door, arms crossed, voice sharp like glass, demanding an explanation as if I'd betrayed the entire family. I wasn't jealous. I was just tired. Tired of chasing approval that was never meant for me. By high school, Ethan had developed a habit of getting into trouble. Drinking, fighting. Yet every time he messed up, my parents covered for him. My father even laughed once and said, "Boys will be boys." When I asked why they never defended me like that, my mother replied, "You're stronger. You don't need help, but strength shouldn't come from neglect. It should come from love." That's when I stopped expecting fairness. I realized that in my family, love was not given. It was earned, and I was tired of paying for it. When I left for college, I thought I could escape that feeling. I told myself I'd start fresh, build a life that didn't revolve around being second best. But favoritism doesn't fade with distance. It lingers, like a stain. While Ethan got his tuition paid, his rent covered, and his car gifted on his birthday, I worked 3 part-time jobs just to afford books. And yet, every phone call from home ended the same way. "Have you talked to your brother lately?" "He's doing so well." They never asked how I was doing. And when they did, it felt like an obligation, not concern. Sometimes I used to wonder if maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Maybe my silence, my independence, my ability to endure made them believe I didn't need love. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some parents raise one child with pride and another with guilt. And no matter how hard you try, they'll never see the difference. Years later, when my marriage began to fall apart, I thought that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally be there for me. That when I reached out in tears, my mother's voice would be soft, my father's tone reassuring. But I was wrong. Because in my family, compassion was reserved for one person only, Ethan. I didn't know it yet, but their reaction to my pain would change everything I believed about family. The day I called them for help was the day I realized. Some bonds are not built on love, but control. And when I finally broke free, I had no idea that years later, fate would hand me the chance to show them what true consequences feel like. It started slowly, little cracks that spread quietly until everything shattered. My marriage was falling apart, and I was the only one trying to hold the pieces together. My husband, Mark, had become distant, cold, like a stranger who happened to share my last name. He'd stay out late, avoid conversations, and treat my pain like an inconvenience. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't supportive enough. Maybe I worked too much. But when I discovered the messages, the kind you can't unsee, I realized it wasn't me. It was betrayal. The man I had loved and trusted for 7 years had been cheating on me. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor, my phone in one hand. tears streaming down my face. I had never felt so small. My chest ached in a way I didn't think was possible. And in that moment, instinctively, I did what most people would do. I called my mother. She picked up after a few rings, her tone sharp and impatient. "Isabella, it's late." "What's wrong?" My voice cracked as I told her everything. The messages, the lies, the betrayal. I waited for comfort. For words like, "I'm here for you," or "You'll be okay." But instead, she sighed and said, "Well, maybe if you had focused more on your marriage and less on your career, he wouldn't have strayed." That one sentence hit harder than anything Mark had ever done. My father's voice came next in the background, calm but cutting. "You've always been too independent for your own good. Maybe this will humble you." After that night, they stopped answering my calls. My messages went unread. Weeks turned into months, and not once did they ask if I was okay. The few times I reached out, the responses were distant. "We're busy. You need to handle your own mess." But when Ethan's car broke down or his rent was late, they'd drop everything and rush to him. Every single time. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was cruelty dressed as parenting. Divorce drained me. Not just emotionally, but financially. Mark had left me with the bills, the lease, and the lawyer fees. I tried to keep up with everything, but it felt like drowning. One day, desperate, I swallowed my pride and asked my parents for a small loan. Not a handout. Just help. My mother's reply was short and sharp. "We're not your bank, Isabella. You made your choices, now live with them." And that was the moment I broke. I realized I wasn't their daughter anymore. Just a disappointment they tolerated from a distance. Nights became long. Dinner became silence. And the world started feeling smaller. I'd wake up to messages from my lawyer, letters from the bank, and voicemails from my boss reminding me about missed deadlines. Sometimes I'd sit by the window, staring at the lights of other homes, wondering how it felt to belong somewhere, to be loved without earning it. But every time I wanted to give up, a voice inside me whispered, "They already cut you off. Don't cut yourself down too." Around the same time, Ethan was thriving. Or at least that's what they said. My mother would occasionally send me photos of his new apartment, or videos from his weekend trips, saying things like, "You should learn from your brother. He makes things happen." I never replied. What was there to say? That I was barely surviving while they celebrated him like a hero? But deep inside, I promised myself something. I would rebuild. Not for them, not for approval, but because they needed to see that the daughter they cast aside would one day stand taller than they ever imagined. It happened one night when my father called. Not to check on me, but to scold me. He said he'd heard from a neighbor that I'd been struggling, and that it was embarrassing for the family name. That call ended with his words echoing in my ear. "You've become a burden, Isabella. Don't expect us to fix your mistakes." And then, silence. The kind of silence that stays in your chest. The kind that makes you realize some people aren't worth chasing anymore. That was the night I stopped trying to prove my worth to them. If love was conditional, I wanted no part of it. But life has a strange way of balancing the scales. Years later, when I had finally rebuilt myself from the ground up, their precious son, Ethan, would make one decision that shattered their perfect illusion. And suddenly, the daughter they abandoned would be the only one who could save them. For months after that final call, I lived in silence. No family dinners, no check-ins, no love. Just the echo of my parents' rejection playing in my head every night. I'd come home to a dark apartment after working 2 jobs, drop my purse on the floor, and sit in the quiet, too exhausted to even eat. Sometimes I'd scroll through my phone, looking at old family photos where we all smiled like we were happy. But the truth was, I'd been invisible long before they cut me off. The realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. They didn't abandon me because of my divorce. They did it because I stopped being useful. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes when your own parents make you feel disposable. You start questioning everything. Your worth, your purpose, even your right to exist. I remember one night vividly. The rain outside was relentless, and the sound of it hitting the window was the only thing keeping me company. I had exactly $12 left in my bank account and a bag of rice in the cupboard. I sat there, staring at the ceiling, thinking, how did I get here? And then I broke. The tears came quietly at first, then violently, like years of suppressed pain erupting all at once. But when the crying stopped, something inside me changed. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. If the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had given up on me, then I would love myself enough to keep going. The next morning, I made a decision. No more begging. No more pity. No more waiting for an apology that would never come. I sold the few pieces of jewelry I had left, used the money to take an online course in digital marketing, and started freelancing on the weekends. It wasn't glamorous. There were days I'd sleep 3 hours and still wake up early for work. But slowly, I began to build something of my own. A new life. A quiet, independent strength that didn't rely on anyone's approval. I got a new job. Better pay. Better people. I made new friends who didn't know my past, who saw me not as a failure, but as someone worth knowing. And for the first time in years, I laughed without feeling guilty. I still remember the first time I paid all my bills on time again. It sounds small, but to me, it was victory. A reminder that even after being abandoned, I could stand on my own 2 feet. Then came the promotion. Then the first vacation I paid for myself. Every milestone felt like proof that I had survived the storm. And somehow, I was still standing. Of course, my parents never called. They heard through mutual relatives that I was doing fine, but not once did they congratulate me or apologize. Their silence was their pride, and mine was my peace. It was a Sunday morning when everything shifted. I was sipping coffee, scrolling through emails, when a text came through from a number I hadn't seen in years. It was my mother. "Isabella, please call us. It's urgent." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My first thought was, someone must have died. My second was, why now? After 3 years of silence, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But curiosity won. I called. She picked up on the first ring, her voice shaky. "It's Ethan," she said, breathless. "He's been arrested." For a few seconds, I couldn't process it. My brother, the golden child, the untouchable one. Arrested? She continued. "They said it's serious, Isabella. He's in real trouble. We don't know what to do. We need your help." I almost laughed. Help? From me? The same daughter they abandoned when I was at my lowest? I took a deep breath. "Why are you calling me?" I asked quietly. My mother hesitated. "Because you're the only one who can fix this." The irony was almost poetic. The same people who had watched me drown were now reaching out because their favorite son was sinking. After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, completely still. A part of me wanted to hang up forever, to finally return the same coldness they once gave me. But another part, the one that still craved justice, not revenge, wanted to face them, not to help, but to make them see. That night, I stood by the window again, watching the same city lights that once made me feel so alone. Only this time, I felt something different. Power. Because for the first time in my life, they needed me. The next morning, I got in my car and drove toward my parents' house. The same house I once ran from. Now the place where everything would finally come full circle. What I didn't know was that this confrontation would change everything and expose secrets I never imagined my family was hiding. I hadn't been back to my parents' house in over 3 years. The driveway looked the same, but the air felt heavier. It wasn't nostalgia. It was tension. That house had seen too many arguments, too many tears swept under the rug. As I parked, I could already see my mother pacing by the window, and my father sitting stiffly on the couch, pretending to be calm. It was like stepping into a time capsule of denial. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and knocked on the door. When my mother opened it, her eyes were red and swollen. Her voice trembled. "Thank God you came, Isabella." I didn't hug her, didn't say hi, just stepped inside and said, "Tell me what happened." They told me everything in rushed, broken sentences. Ethan had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Apparently, he'd been borrowing money from the company he worked for, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now, his employers were pressing full charges. As my father spoke, I could see the cracks in his pride. The man who once looked at me with disappointment now looked lost. "He didn't mean it," my mother whispered, as if saying it softly made it true. "He just got in over his head. You know how kind he is kind." That was the word they always used to excuse him. When he bullied me, he was just teasing. When he wrecked my car in high school, it was just a mistake. And when he lied to their faces, they called it youthful carelessness. I stared at them, my voice calm but sharp. "You want me to fix it, don't you?" My father swallowed. "You're the only one who's stable right now. You have connections, don't you?" It was almost funny. The daughter they once called a burden was now their last hope. "Do you even realize what you did to me?" I asked quietly. My mother's lips trembled. "We just thought—" "No, you didn't think," I interrupted. "When I was losing everything, you cut me off. You told me to learn to survive. And now that your perfect son is facing consequences, suddenly I'm worth a phone call?" My father stood up, his voice rising. "We were trying to protect the family. You were emotional, unpredictable." "Unpredictable?" I snapped. I was hurting. "You left me when I needed you the most. And now you expect me to save Ethan because you can't face the truth. You raised a man who thought the world owed him everything." Silence filled the room, the kind that feels like it could crack the walls. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I just don't want to lose my children." I looked at her, the sadness softening my tone. "You already did." After a long pause, my father finally said it. "If you could just lend us the money to hire a lawyer?" There it was. The real reason I was called. Not love, not reconciliation, just desperation. I leaned back in my chair and said slowly, "I'm not giving you a cent." Their faces fell. My mother gasped. "Isabella, please, he's your brother." "Yes," I said firmly. "And when I was your daughter in crisis, you told me to handle it on my own. So maybe it's his turn to learn that lesson." My father slammed his fist on the table. "How dare you talk to us like that?" I stood up, calm and unshaken. "No, Dad. How dare you expect me to forget everything you did just because you're scared now?" As I turned to leave, my mother reached for my arm. "Please, Isabella, if he goes to prison," I looked her straight in the eyes, "then maybe, for once, he'll understand what it feels like to be abandoned." Her hand fell away. No more begging, no more guilt. For years, I'd been the forgotten one, the disappointment, the afterthought. But that moment walking out of that house, I realized something powerful. I didn't need revenge. I already had it. Because the same people who thought I'd never make it were now learning that I didn't need them to. I got into my car and sat there for a while, letting the silence settle. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, but instead I felt peaceful. Revenge wasn't shouting or punishing them. It was walking away with dignity, and knowing they'd never have that kind of strength. When I started the engine, my phone buzzed again. It was another text from my mother. "We understand. Take care of yourself." I smiled sadly. For the first time, I think she actually meant it. But what happened next surprised even me. Because a few weeks later, when Ethan finally called me from jail, the conversation that followed changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and revealed a truth that went far deeper than I ever imagined. It was a quiet Sunday morning when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, until instinct made me pick up. "Hello?" A deep, tired voice came through. "Isabella, it's me." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Ethan. His tone wasn't arrogant like before. There was something broken in it. I didn't say a word, letting the silence make him uncomfortable. I I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, he said finally, but I need to tell you something before it's too late. He took a shaky breath. They told you what happened, right? About the money? Yes, I said, my voice calm but cold. That you stole from your company and expected me to fix it. He sighed. It's not that simple. I didn't take it for myself. I frowned. Then for who? There was a pause. Then he whispered, for Mom and Dad. The air froze around me. What are you talking about? Ethan's words came fast, desperate, like a confession he'd been holding for months. After your divorce, they were struggling. Dad lost a huge chunk of money from a bad investment, and they were drowning in debt. Mom begged me not to tell you. She said you'd think less of them. I started sending money every month, but it wasn't enough. So, I borrowed from the company. I thought I could replace it before anyone noticed I sat there, stunned. Everything I thought I knew started to blur. They used you, I said slowly. You risked everything for their pride. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, and now I'm the criminal. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded. Because you were the only one who got out, he said softly. You had a life. You had freedom. Mom didn't want you to think she'd failed. I thought I could protect them. Protect them? The same parents who let me drown while saving him? The irony was almost cruel. He continued, voice cracking. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I didn't respond right away. My mind was spinning. Anger, pity, sadness, all tangled together. Finally, I said quietly, you didn't hurt anyone, Ethan. You just kept the cycle going. He went silent. I'll tell you something, Ethan, I said after a long pause. When you grow up in a family that measures love by sacrifice, you start thinking pain equals loyalty. But that's not love. That's manipulation. He sniffled. I know that now. Do you? I asked. Because love shouldn't require you to destroy yourself to prove it. There was another pause. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan said, I wish I had been more like you. That sentence hit harder than I expected. It wasn't pride. It was grief. He continued quietly, Mom talks about you a lot, you know. She says she misses you every day. I think she finally realized what she did. I closed my eyes, letting that sink in. For years, I had wanted an apology, some acknowledgement that I wasn't invisible. Now I had it. But not from the people I expected. I hope she does, I said softly. Because realizing too late is worse than not realizing at all. Before hanging up, Ethan said one last thing. Isabella, when I get out, I don't expect you to be there, but I just wanted you to know you were right. About everything, my throat tightened. Take care of yourself, Ethan, I said. And then I ended the call. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at my phone. The anger I once carried so tightly began to loosen. Not forgiveness, just release. Maybe revenge wasn't about punishing those who hurt you. Maybe it was about freeing yourself from needing their validation at all. A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother. It was short, just 3 sentences. We made terrible choices. You didn't deserve the pain we gave you. If this is goodbye, we understand. I folded the letter and smiled faintly. It wasn't closure, but it was enough. If you've ever had to walk away from people you thought you'd never lose, you know how heavy that silence can be. But it's also the start of peace. And if stories like this resonate with you, about reclaiming your worth and finding strength in pain, make sure to subscribe. Because every week we share real stories that prove healing is the most powerful revenge. But just when I thought the story was over, something unexpected happened. A lawyer reached out, saying Ethan had named me as a key witness in his case. And what I discovered in those court documents shattered everything I believed about my family's past. A week after Ethan's call, I was on my way home from work when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't him. "Hello, Ms. Rivera," the voice on the other end said. "This is David Lang, attorney representing your brother, Ethan Rivera. He's asked me to contact you regarding his case." My stomach tightened. His case? I already know he's been charged. What more is there to say? The lawyer hesitated. "There's more to the story than what's in the papers. Ethan wanted you to see some documents. He said it's time you knew the truth." I didn't know what truth could possibly make sense of everything that had happened, but something in his tone told me this wasn't just about money. 2 days later, I sat in a small, sterile conference room. David Lang placed a thick folder on the table between us. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. "These," he said, "are the financial records that tie Ethan's charges to your parents' account." But that's not all. He also left a signed letter addressed to you. I flipped the folder open. My heart pounded. The first few pages were spreadsheets, bank transfers, and names of companies I didn't recognize. Then I saw something that made me freeze. A transaction under my name. My own name. According to the records, several payments had been made from Ethan's company to an account supposedly owned by me. Tens of thousands of dollars. Money that I had never seen. "What is this?" I asked sharply. David leaned forward, his expression cautious. "Your parents used your name, Isabella. They opened an account in your identity years ago, when you were still in college." My pulse spiked. "Why would they do that?" He sighed. "To hide money from the IRS." For a moment, the room spun. Everything I thought I knew about my family, their pride, their obsession with appearances, suddenly made sense. They weren't just playing favorites. They were protecting themselves. David continued. "Your brother found out about it after you graduated. That's why he got so deeply involved in their finances. He was trying to cover for them when the authorities started asking questions. He thought if he took the blame, he could protect them both. And you." I stared at the papers, unable to speak. So all those years, the love, the favoritism, the endless excuses, they weren't just emotional manipulation. They were distraction. They kept me out of the loop, not because they didn't care, but because they were hiding their guilt under the guise of favoritism. And Ethan, the golden child, wasn't just their favorite. He was their shield. I sank back into the chair, trembling. It was all so twisted. I'd spent decades believing I wasn't enough, that I didn't deserve love because my brother was better. But the truth was simpler and crueler. They chose him not because they loved him more, but because they needed someone they could control. And when that failed, they turned on him too. I decided to visit my parents one last time. When they opened the door, the look on their faces said everything. Shock, guilt, fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We thought we could fix it before you found out. We didn't want you dragged into our mistakes." "Dragged in?" I said bitterly. "You used my name. You made me part of your crime without my consent." My father's voice broke the silence. "We were desperate, Isabella. The business was failing. We thought it would help. Help who?" I demanded. "Because it sure didn't help Ethan. He's sitting in a cell for something you started." They said nothing, just stood there, crumbling under the weight of truth. That night, I made a choice. I wasn't going to press charges against them, not because I forgave them, but because I refused to become like them. Their punishment would be living with what they'd done. The guilt, the loss, the silence. Before leaving, I said one final thing. "You spent your whole lives protecting your image. Now the world will see who you really are. That's your legacy." And then I walked away. Months later, Ethan's case went to court. I testified truthfully, explaining how he'd tried to cover for them. The judge saw his intent, not as malice, but misguided loyalty. Ethan was sentenced to community service and financial probation, while my parents faced separate civil charges. After the trial, Ethan looked at me and smiled weakly. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad the truth came out. Maybe now we can start over." I nodded. I think we already did. For years, I thought revenge meant making them suffer. But standing in that courtroom, I realized the real victory was peace. Peace from their control, from their expectations, from the need to be loved by people who never truly saw me. I wasn't their disappointment anymore. I was their consequence. If you've ever been blamed, used, or made to feel invisible in your own family, remember this. Your story can end differently. You can rise, rebuild, and reclaim your worth. If stories like this speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. Every week, we bring you real stories that remind you. Revenge doesn't always mean hate. Sometimes it's just living well. But the story doesn't end there. Because just when I thought everything was over, I received one final message. A letter that revealed what my brother had really sacrificed all along. And that letter changed how I saw him forever. It happened on a rainy Thursday night, one of those nights where the world feels heavy and silence echoes louder than thunder. I had just gotten home from another long day at work when my phone rang. It was Mom. For the first time in years, her voice sounded desperate. "Your brother's been arrested," she said. "We need your help. Please, you're the only one who can get him out." I froze. My brother, their golden child, the one they always protected, always excused, always celebrated, was in jail. And suddenly, they needed me. My mind flashed back to when I had begged them for help during my divorce, how they turned their backs on me. How Mom said, "You made your bed, now lie in it." How Dad refused to even answer my calls. Now here they were, pleading for the daughter they once abandoned. I asked quietly, "Why me? You have a son you've always believed in. Why not ask him to fix his own mess for once?" There was silence. Then my mother's voice broke. "Please, he doesn't deserve this. You're stronger. You've always been stronger." That's when it hit me. Their love was never about fairness. It was about convenience. They needed me now because I was useful, not because they cared. I took a deep breath and said, "You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a backup plan." I'm not that anymore. Before she could reply, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. And in that moment, soaked in tears and thunder, I realized the real breaking point wasn't losing my family. It was finally letting them go. If you've ever been treated like an afterthought by your own family, let me know in the comments. Stories like this remind us that sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's strength. And if you want to hear more stories that hit this deep, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard. Weeks went by, and I continued ignoring my parents' messages. They left voicemails filled with tears and regret, but I couldn't forget how they left me to drown when I needed them most. Then one night, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw my mother, her eyes red, her face pale. She looked smaller somehow, weaker. "Please," she whispered, clutching her purse. "We don't know what to do. The lawyer said we need more money. Your father's health is failing from the stress." I stayed silent. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not disappointment, not judgment, but fear. That's when something in me shifted. I realized I didn't hate them anymore. I pitied them. They had built their world around a son who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. And now, without him, their whole foundation was crumbling. So I said calmly, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't fix what you broke." She burst into tears. "We were wrong, Emily. About everything. We should have been there for you. I didn't respond." Instead, I closed the door gently, not out of anger, but finality. That night, I felt lighter than I had in years. I realized forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just meant freedom. And when I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I smiled. I wasn't the broken daughter anymore. I was the one who survived and thrived. Have you ever been treated unfairly by family and wished you'd spoken up sooner? Tell me your story in the comments. Your voice might just help someone else find their strength too. Months passed after that night, and life finally started to feel peaceful. I had a new apartment, a new job, and, more importantly, peace of mind. My brother was serving time, and my parents had gone quiet. Occasionally, I'd see their names pop up on my phone, but I never picked up. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. One morning, as I was preparing to head to work, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, but I knew that handwriting. My mother's. Inside was a letter. Shaky, emotional, raw. She wrote about how my father barely spoke anymore, how the house felt empty without my laughter. She said, "We realized too late that love isn't about choosing favorites. It's about standing beside your children, all of them, when they fall." For a moment, I just stared at it. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to laugh. But mostly, I just felt peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by their approval or their neglect. I had learned to live on my own terms. So I folded the letter and put it in my drawer, not to respond, but to remind myself that closure sometimes comes quietly, without confrontation. The best revenge wasn't their regret. It was my happiness, the kind they could never control again. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that remind us. Sometimes healing is the greatest revenge of all.